Right.
Hello, welcome. Anybody who will listen to this, much appreciated. We're continuing our streak of episodes for getting to know us as people. Today we're talking about our top 10 books, and for me, this was surprisingly difficult considering how not into books I am. It's a fairly new thing in my life within the last few years, and I actually really struggled to get it down to 10.
Hmm,
Uh, so, with that, I'll just go ahead and get started with my 10 through 6.
sweet.
Um, 10, Macbeth by Shakespeare. I know it's technically a play, but it's fantastic. It's amazing. Number 9, Ninth House by Lee Bardugo. Number 8, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. 7, Shadowhunter by Michael Reeves, read by Sam Witwer. Um, and number 6, Gregor the Overlander by Suzanne Collins.
Okay, sweet. I like these book suggestions, book favorites, whatever you want to call it. Um, Macbeth. I kind of was surprised about that. I don't think that we've ever talked about. I don't think we've ever talked about Shakespeare before. Where did you get introduced to Macbeth? For someone who doesn't like reading, that's kind of a pretty intense thing to be on a favorites list. Tell me more about it.
It's pretty simple, actually. In high school, my senior year, we were allowed to opt out of traditional English class, which I took instantly because traditional English class is the most pointless subject you can take in education. And the alternatives were 3 classes. You could take film literature for a semester, Shakespeare for a semester, or a different one for a semester. And I actually tried to get into the other one, but it was full, so I took Shakespeare and film lit. And it was just a whole semester where we talked about Shakespeare. We read Twelfth Night. We skipped over Romeo and Juliet because well known,
And
everybody
it's the
knows it,
worst.
and I don't think it's the worst, but it's just the most well known. So we didn't really spend too much time on it. We talked about Shakespeare's life, um, but Macbeth and Othello were the ones that really made me go, "Oh,
Okay.
this is really cool." And this is really good to dive into, and I can really enjoy reading this and being a part of a group that read this. Shakespeare is still difficult for me to read on my own, um, as is any book or thing. What's it? Stephen King does the same thing where he writes in script, like for scripts, rather than traditional novel, and that's more difficult for me. But reading this as a class or as smaller groups was really, really cool. Macbeth just gets a slight edge to Othello in terms of Shakespeare, so that got my number 10.
Cool. It's fantastic. There's a reason that it's a classic. My personal favorite is King Lear. I love King Lear. I love the idea of exploring dementia and Alzheimer's before we really understood anything about dementia and Alzheimer's. The king going crazy that way, and that's at least that's the way that I read it. I find fascinating. Um, do you think that I've always wondered this? Do you think that some of these old classics have simply just been outdone? For example, Romeo and Juliet. They've done the exact same story over and over and over again. And in my opinion, there are works like, oh, what is that musical called? Maria, Maria. I just met a girl named Maria. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No idea.
The audience will know what I'm talking about. It, in my opinion, is just better done than Romeo and Juliet. Do you think that that happens with things like Macbeth, or are they timeless and classic and can't be outdone?
I think there's something to say about the originals and where they come from.
Okay.
Take Romeo and Juliet, for example. That's the most well known, right? You also have things like Nomeo and Juliet, right? a total mocking, like animated thing that's actually really entertaining and good. You have Hamlet versus The Lion King, right? Both very good, both great. Love both of them. Especially the one with what's his name? Plays Doctor Who. Uh
I'm not a
anyway,
Doctor Who fan. I don't know.
okay. Well, he's a famous actor. Anyway, he does a phenomenal job in Hamlet. Um the film version. Um but there is something to say about those originals and where they actually come from. When you're talking about The Lion King, you don't get that depth and the use of wording that Shakespeare once did, right? Like it's a very different thing to listen to other rappers versus Eminem because Eminem takes great care in the verbiage that he chooses. And that's very similar to Shakespeare. Shakespeare took very great care in his verbiage. And, the average American has a working vocabulary of, I think, like 6,000 words or something. Shakespeare's was like 30,000. So it's just insane the level of detail he can construe in certain vocabulary. Um, is it for everyone? No, it is older. Children definitely would enjoy Romeo and Juliet more than Romeo and Juliet. Uh, the whole tragic thing is no longer a shock like it was back in the day, so they having the double suicide is like okay, whatever. It's better just to have the happy ending for most audiences. But for me, taking some time from time to time and digging into that much deeper, more carefully thought out piece of literature is amazing.
Very cool. I like that answer a lot. I It's something that's been on my mind on and off because I enjoy reading these classics. I enjoy digging into them. But with every other form of technology, and really words are a kind of technology, you grow upon that technology. But words are a little different because you can't copy that person's voice. You can try, but you're never going to be Shakespeare. You're never going to be Tolstoy or any of these greats of literature. It makes things a little bit different. Let me ask you about some of these other ones. The Ninth House. I know you've told me about this one. I honestly can't remember what it's about. What's the general synopsis?
So Lee Bardugo has a series of books, all based in the same universe, all centering around these eight houses who practice magic at Yale University. They're an underground society. They're secret. And it's this ninth house's job to make sure that they don't overdo it with their magic. Um, they're kind of like the police force of magic at this school.
Okay.
The rest of her books are far more popular and they come in series. Shadow of Bone, um,
Oh, okay. It's that
all
author.
those, yeah. Um, but this one is kind of like an offshoot book. I think there's another one coming out or a sequel to Ninth House. I'm not sure. Uh, but this is the one that I was actually able to get into. I've tried some of the other ones, but this one really got me into it. And the magic system and the fact that they're at school, it's the main character, Alex. She's kind of this good for nothing, kind of makes poor life decisions person who gets given a second chance because she has this ability about her. And so she gets thrown into this world of magic and stuff and given the task solely because there's nobody else in the ninth house to police the magic of these other houses. And it's just really cool. She's into it because her friend was the previous ninth house person and he had gone missing. So her investment was trying to find answers. The investment of the school was having somebody there to make sure that this magical society didn't go overboard and expose magic. And it all kind of collided and was really entertaining and really great. It's not a very long book. It's not like super short either, but very, very cool. Loved the writing, loved the characters, all of them. There are some stories like Demon Slayer that just have some character that you just cannot stand, and this book does not have that. It's just like you love all the characters, good and bad. You know, you love the interactions between this policing society versus the, brads of the school and the cheerleaders of the school, and just really builds up to something very, very, very cool. And I would highly, highly recommend this one, because it is a standalone story to her worlds, and you don't have to dive in and not get a whole picture or a whole story.
Awesome. I will check that one out. It sounds interesting to me. The one other one that I wanted to ask a little bit about is To Kill a Mockingbird. Um, we're trying not to get political, but there's a lot of politics associated with this book on whether we're still a racist society, whether we have been. Do you think is this book the top because of current day? Is it because you enjoy history? Why do you like this book so much?
It's all about history and understanding where we came from. I personally love the book. Um, that's why it made my list. It is super well written. The perspective of a child viewing this series of events unfold is incredible.
Okay.
The way she, just the way it was written was just beautiful, with a unique perspective on a unique take of an important time in history. Um, so this is one of the books that I recommend that everybody should read. Sorry, everybody should read at least once in your life. If you don't want to read it, watch the black and white movie. It does 95% of what the book does. It's an excellent representation. Um, but it's just an incredible book. I really liked it. I love the history. I don't, I'm not going to speak towards today's politics. That's not my place. That's not like the purpose of this podcast. For me, the enjoyment comes solely from learning more about that point in history and taking a child's perspective of that point in history. Because I don't think it's deniable that we have been racist in our history, because we have been.
Absolutely.
Plain and simple. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. We have been, and so seeing what that was like, and like I said, the child's perspective is awesome. It's great. I was shocked to hear that some people did not read this in school, because to me, it's just everybody should read this. Everybody.
Yeah, I read it
I
twice in
don't care
school.
what your history is. I don't care what you're currently going through.
Why do you
It doesn't.
think that they should read it? Is it to just understand history more? Is it what do you want people to take away from this book?
Where we came from,
Okay.
right? It is a child's perspective of this extremely racist lawsuit, right? Whether you want to talk about race in today's age or prejudice or whatever, the first step to looking towards a better future is to analyze and understand where you've come from or where we've come from in the past. That's why I think history is the most important subject you can learn in school. And this gives a very clear, from a child, like I said, it's from a child. I think that's really important to this story. It's from a child who doesn't really understand everything that's going on, seeing these events take place. And you can definitely take associations from that to today's day and age. But I think it's very important to see this is where we came from. This is our history. Whether you like it or not, say it's over and done with or not, this is our history. So, in order to prevent similar mistakes or patterns of behavior going forward, step one, see where we've come from. learn your history. And because this one is American history, everybody should read it.
Even if you're not American?
I mean, that would entirely depend. Right? If we were in Germany, I don't think it's as relevant as reading like the Schindler's List,
Okay.
right? Like learn your own histories, learn other histories. You can learn a lot from other people's history. If you really want to really see where your country is going, look and see at what previous countries in the past have done, right? America, personally, because we are in this unique little bubble, we don't really fit patterns as well as some other countries do. But we can still learn a lot from ancient Rome. We can still learn a lot from ancient Greece. We can still learn a lot from Britain. We can still learn a lot from Canada. We can still learn a lot from a lot of these places. And I think the history is the first place you should be looking for those things.
Very, very cool. I like that a lot. Those are some great suggestions, great books, great favorites, great suggestions. My top 10 are 10 Endurance by Alfred Lansing, 9 The Mother of Learning by Domagoj Kermek. I don't know exactly how to say his name. Number 8 Exile by R.A. Salvador, Principles by Ray Dalio, and number 6 The Forgotten Highlander by Alistair Ukart. I think is how you say his name.
I've never heard of any of these. Why don't you just go ahead and overview each of them and why they made your list?
Okay. Um, Endurance is a book, it is about endurance. It's one of the first voyages trying to get to the South Pole, and you have wonderful. I love stories about people pushing beyond limits, limits that they didn't think that they could get past, limits that a normal person don't think are possible to get past, and they do it anyway. I think it is amazing. Um, so I mean they go on this boat and the boat gets smashed by ice and they have to take these little rafts in the middle of nowhere, icy waters. They're having to live on penguins and blubber and whatever they can just to be able to feed themselves. They live through a winter down there and they just keep pushing forward no matter what it takes. I love that kind of story. I love the stories of people that take a chance to believe in themselves and fight for life and what you become when you have no other choice besides to just keep going forward. It's Have you heard of Ernest Shackleton? Have you heard that name?
No.
So he was one of the famous explorers, and this is his story. He was famous from Britain, and his story is his whole journey shows who you can be and what you can become, and that's why I love that book. Mother of Learning is, in my opinion, the school magic thing done better in every way than Harry Potter or any other school magic thing that I've ever read. You wake up with your main character and you realize that he is inside some kind of time loop. And I love time travel when it's done well, but it's very, very rarely done well. This is the best time loop I have seen in anything by far, bar none. It is the best. Everything about it makes sense. It's a very unique concept that I didn't see coming, and you're trying to figure out this puzzle of why he's in the time loop and how to get out of it. Getting out of the time loop is not some contrived thing. It makes sense. It all works together. Getting out is not easy. He has to consistently grow and do some things that he's not really proud of to be able to get strong enough to get out of this time loop. The end of the book series of the book is phenomenal. Like it's one of the best endings that I've read in anything. Um, and the creativity that's done in this book with the creature designs and the magic system itself is wonderful. The next one is Exile by R.A. Salvador. Um, Dritz Duorden, he's very, very famous in D&D. The Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 both have this character in it. I was actually hoping he would be in Baldur's Gate 3, but he was not. Fantastic written character. He's a dark elf that isn't so dark, but everything around him is evil, and he wants to escape. And he has a mentor that decides to believe in him and help him get out of this horrible place and get to the surface, where basically everyone hates him because he is part of an evil race. Um, and this book in particular is about he's been exiled. That's why it's called Exile. And how does he get back to the surface? How does he survive? And what do they do while they're hunting him down? And the what they do to hunt him down and how he survives is so well written, and there's a reason this character became a staple of anything D&D. Principles by Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio is an investor. He's the highest return investor of all time. Warren Buffett makes more money, but he's just been doing it for longer at a lower percentage. Ray Dalio lost everything. He lost his entire business and then started from the ground up with the lessons that he learned and built this huge corporation. And it goes through the principles that made him successful. And he talks about his own stories. He talks about how he would, when they were doing investing, they would put it into computer algorithms and figure out exactly what strategies would get the highest returns. And he started doing those same strategies and those same principles in his own life and in the life of his employees. What principles can we use to have the most success moving forward, step by step by step? Forgotten Highlander is an absolutely insane story about a a person who grew up during World War One, and he gets drafted to go over to Singapore during World War II. It's in Britain, and he becomes a prisoner of war. Um, it's another story about resilience and what resilience can really do for you and how you can move forward. The guy loses his leg. He gets dropped off at sea. He goes into something that the Japanese called a hell ship and survives that. He loses an eye, survives that. And then when he gets back home, he goes back out again. And he goes back out again. And he goes back out again. And nothing stops this guy. He just keeps going. And his body is taking the toll. He's getting beat up. But he believes in freedom. He believes in Britain. He believes in the message that we need to shut down the Japanese. We need to shut down the Nazis. And he just keeps going again and again and again and again. He was remarkable. And it's a story that, if I had a story that I think everyone should read, it's probably that one.
And what do you think everybody should be getting out of that one?
How much more is inside of you? Nothing stops this guy. He should have died multiple times, but he just keeps going. And I think a lot of times we live in a pretty comfortable world and a pretty comfortable life, and we don't push ourselves to our limits. I don't do that. It's something that I work on every single day. How can I be better? How can I push harder? How can I be the kind of person that could lose my leg, lose my eye, get shot in the head, whatever it is, and just keep going forward? It's easy to get complacent. He doesn't get complacent. It's easy to just go on your accolades. He could have just stayed home and been a war hero, but he doesn't. He goes back out. He goes and attacks it again. And you should do the same thing with your life. Your life is worth attacking again and again and again until you find happiness because you deserve it.
Cool. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. My 5 through 2. Number 5 is An Emperor in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. Number 4 is Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinneman. Number 3 is Dungeon Crawler Carl Arcanist's Cookbook, again by Matt Dinneman. And my number 2 is A Night Circus by Aaron Morgenstern.
Okay. What is Ember of Ashes? I don't recognize that title at all.
It's a another fantasy novel. Uh, Main character is got some special ability who goes out and meets some people. Um, there's some very heavy themes about prejudice, racism, class systems, all this kinds of stuff. And this character, the main character, is the poor girl from the gypsy family. Um, and the second main character is the guy who's the I can't remember if he's the prince or just like the head guard guy or whatever. And they both have their existing prejudices, and they get thrown into a situation together where they have to work together and build their way out of it. What I love about this book is the magic system is well thought out and balanced. Um, it's not like Harry Potter, where everything is really basic and convenient for the main characters. Um, it's not like Mistborn, where it's incredibly imbalanced towards the main character. Uh, don't look at me like that.
What are
It's
you
true.
talking about?
She's Mistborn. She has all the powers, unlike 99% of
I
the
know, but
population.
she's literally fighting against gods. It's not misbalanced. It's the only way that she has enough power to be able to
Okay,
make it.
whatever. Uh huh. Anyway,
She's out of
uh,
his mind.
it's a perfectly well built system. Um, it's not all about the magic. There's a fair bit of like physical training that can go against the magic. It's not like the magic people are completely dominant either. Um, so yeah, Ember in the Ashes, great book, great book.
Very cool, man. So, I'll just say this now. My number 4 is Dungeon Crawler Carl, book 3, the cookbook one also. Um, these books are fantastic, and they are not given nearly enough love. I think people are starting to catch on, but they should be listened to more. They're incredibly well written. All the characters are deep and unique. It's a great series. Is there a way that you can think of that we could make lit RPG in general more accessible to more fantasy fans and kind of get rid of the stigma so more people would read books like this?
No, because I'm still against the lit RPG genre as a whole.
Okay.
This one's very different in the fact that yes, it technically has statistics, but they're barely mentioned, um, and often don't play that vital of a role in the outcome of the conflict or the story.
It is a lot of how smart is Carl, how fast is Carl, and the other characters that are involved, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, it's how well did they pick up on the clues? Did they figure out the puzzles? Did they put it together in time? And did the AI think it was good for the story? Or did the Borat Corporation think it was good for the story? You know, yes, technically they're in a world, they're sucked into a dungeon where they have statistics and levels and health points, but it doesn't really matter, right? Like, I never once had to keep track of levels, skills, health points, how close is he, He never once is like, and Carl had 13 health points when the arrow hit his knee, knocking him down 12. Like, it's not like that. It's just not like Donut, the cat, the talking cat, gets struck, and Carl is concerned that she's dead, right? Like, there's no, but she had this many health points and
It's just,
whatever. Like, the only time it's really
yeah,
come into play is like there's a cooldown technically in the game for how many potions you can take, and it's based on your stat. So he has to at one point in time in the series go, well, I can't give Donut a health potion now because she's unconscious and her cooldown hasn't finished yet.
Yeah, and they talk about
Okay, that
some
was
game
like
mechanics.
barely.
And they have to use some of those game mechanics, especially when Carl breaks them, um, to be able to find success as they go forward. But other than that,
Yeah,
you're right. It doesn't go into the nitty gritty. Oh, I had just enough strength points, so I was able to whatever.
yeah. So for those who are listening and not really following along, Dungeon Crawler Carl is a lit RPG fantasy series, which turns a lot of people off right off the bat. It's about a regular Joe, Carl. He works on boats for a living. He used to be in the Navy. He has a cat. Um, when one night aliens turn Earth into a video game dungeon, and Carl and the cat Donut go into the dungeon. The cat gets talking abilities, and the writer does a phenomenal job of writing how a cat would talk. Um, as well as that adjustment period of I'm a cat and I can talk. So Donut has this beautiful uh, growth, this beautiful arc in her story, and Carl and Donut go in it together and try and get through the dungeon. There are 7 books out right now.
There are, yes,
Six,
seven
seven,
books out right
seven. I
now.
think there's 7 books right now. Eighth one coming soon. This is a series that I would highly recommend listening to rather than reading. Um, it's just wonderfully done with the voices and sound effects and everything that's done in addition to the story itself. Um, it's produced by Sound Booth Theater. For those of you who have heard of them, they just put extra effort into those audiobooks. And because this is a lit RPG, I think it really benefits from those perks. Um,
I listen to
so, yeah.
audiobooks all the time. I listen to sometimes one or two a week. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. And I honestly believe that Dungeon Crawler Carl is the best audiobook that you can buy. Um, when the new book comes out, Jeff Hayes, who does the voice work, will do these cold reads where he shows how he's doing the work. And I've sat and watched him because he's so talented. And there'll be times where he like uses a cup to muffle his voice, or he backs away from the mic as he's screaming so it makes it sound like it's further away in the book. And he does all of these little tricks that are masterful. His ability to switch between voices like that is incredible. You'll watch him come up with a new character. The main author, Matt Dinneman, comes up with a new character, and he plays with different voices, and you see him switching on the fly. Voice, 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 voice. Nope, that's the right one. We're going with that. And then he keeps that voice and is able to switch next one, next voice, next voice, next voice. It's it's watching someone who is a master at what they do. And I would highly recommend the books.
Yeah. Please, anybody who's willing to, just give it a shot. It's not going to hurt you, it's not going to kill you. Uh, it is fantastic. There's been a number of people in my life who said, I guess I'll give it a try. My brother was going to on a trip to Australia, downloaded the books at my request, put it off, wasn't really into it, put it off, wasn't really into it, came back, still hadn't listened to it, and then finally decided, okay, Josh keeps asking about it, I'll give it a try, and just loved it. And now I've got another brother who listened to it at that request, and he's gotten into it recently. Um, I had a coworker very similar. I had just made a deal that if I had listened to or read one of his recommended books, he would listen to mine. His sucked, mine was great, and he's completely into it. He's super into it. So, uh, just just give it a try. There's a website you can go to listen to part one of the first book for free. It's a little bit different than the audiobook because it's a whole sound booth theater production with other voice actors and more sound effects and all that kind of stuff. Um, but would give you a taste if you're not willing to spend the $10 on Audible or whatever it is, even though it's absolutely worth that.
For sure.
Um,
And the first
yeah,
book, I think, is the worst one, and it's still really, really good, but it just gets better. If you like the first book, I promise you will like the rest of the series. I have another coworker that I also introduced the books to, and I kept asking him, like, have you read them yet? Have you read them yet? Have you read them yet? And then he downloaded the first book, decided to read it, decided to listen to it, and within 2 weeks he was caught up on the whole series, and he was complaining to me that the next book wasn't out yet.
yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And that's just the way it is. It's really hard to sell. It's really hard to pitch, especially when you're saying lit RPG, because either people know what that is, and then it's an instant like, oh, that's the new nerd thing. No, thank you. Or it's a, oh, what's that? And you have to explain, oh, well, it's kind of like they're in a video game, and they have stats and health points and
Yeah,
levels, and people go, oh,
it
that's not what I want from my book.
sounds dumb, but like I've tried to explain this book a million different times. You have a guy and his talking cat who go through an intergalactic game show that's kind of like a gladiator arena, but not really, and they're trying to get deeper on floors while people are watching them. And it sounds dumb, but I promise these books are fantastic.
They truly truly are. Yeah.
So, Night Circus by Aaron Morgenstein,
Morgenstern.
Morgenstern was higher than both of the dungeon crawlers. What do
Yeah.
you love about this book? Tell me a little bit about it.
It is the best magic system, magic story I have ever read.
Okay.
If you wanted a book that would make you feel wonder and awe, it is this book. So the premise of this book is there's two master magicians with real magic,
Okay.
and they train their own acolytes. And once every 20 years or 50 years or whatever it is, they get together and they decide who the best magician is based on a competition between their two trainees, their two acolytes. So a night circus takes the perspective of this girl who is trained by one, this boy who's trained by another, and they don't know that they're in competition with each other. So they are put into this night circus by their masters, told to make the most amazing magic you can possibly imagine and work with and whatever, and go do. And so this night circus travels around the world and only arrives at night for one night. Tickets are free, and people get in to see the magic and the night circus. There's one that's like a trampoline room. There's one that's, you know, this, that, and the other. There's one with this tree, and of course, these two main characters start getting to know each other. They start falling in love with each other. So it's a romance story on top of all of that kind of stuff. And in their competition with each other, they are making grander magical gestures for each other. And it's just beautiful. It's great. It is a shorter book. It's really easy to get through. Um, all of the books on my list, save for Dungeon Crawler, are ones that I have physically read and been able. Oh, I guess Shadowhunter, physically read and been able to get through, which tells a lot about the amazing writing that it is. To get somebody like me with major attention issues to sit down and actually open a physical book in the quiet and just delve into and tear through these books. The writing is fantastic. Magic system is amazing. Story is great. Plot is really interesting and cool. And for those of you who are faster readers, you could probably get through it in like a day, day and a half. Like it is so good, and every part of it is worth reading. It's fantastic.
That's awesome. My 5 through 2. Number 5 is The Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie. 4 is Dungeon Crawler, Book 3. 3 is Pet Cemetery by Stephen King. And 2 is Kingdoms of Death by Christopher Rocchio.
All right, I want to focus on just Dungeon Crawler for another second.
Okay.
Why did number 3 make your list and not 1, 2? You said it gets better over time. Why is 6 not the top one? If that's the case, why is number 3 there for you?
So I'm going to try to not spoil it because I really do want people to read this book. But the iron tangle that is done in this book in particular is a series of subway systems that is mapped out in a very unique way, is what I'll say. And the way he handles this whole idea for the level design, I loved. Second that I read it, I was like, how did he come up with this? How did he add so many of these unique details into it and make it work so well? And then you have another character that gets presented in the book before this, but is majorly expounded upon. Her name's Katya in this book, and I love this character. I think the character is lovable and requires change to be able to function in this world, but still wants to remain kind, even though this world is not a kind place. And how does she deal with that? She's a very small, kind of soft spoken character, and she has to become more than that, or she will not make it. What do you do when you live in a place that is so cruel, that is so dark, but you're not that kind of person? She has to figure that out. And he writes that masterfully. There is
He does
a
for sure, especially the combination of her being put into the group with Carl, the main character of the story, who's being presented as a little bit off the rails, a little bit more insane, a little bit more intense. And Donut, which is essentially a child in this world because she's a cat who just got sentience, you know.
yeah.
So
And Donuts had to grow a lot, but in this book, you have one of my favorite scenes in any book ever. It's the part with Katia at the front of the train. I love this part. But you see multiple character growths. You see Carl grow in this moment. You see Donut realize that maybe she just can't trust everybody. Maybe the world is a little bit more and a little bit deeper than she thought. It gets rid of the child like innocence just a little bit. Katya has a major turning point in the book in that particular scene that is fantastic. The whole scene in general is badass, and Matt has this really unique ability to have major growth of characters along with insane action pieces. And you'll have these spots where you get a little bit of a chance to breathe, but then it's action again. And the action is wild, it's very well thought out, and a lot of times the action also increases the character's growth. And he intertwines those pieces so unbelievably well. And in my opinion, that is done better in book 3 than anywhere else in the series.
so do you think book 3 is the best of the series, or is it just your personal favorite?
That's a good question. I think it's probably my personal favorite. I think the last book that you've read is probably the best of the series. It is it's probably the second best in quality behind the last one that you've read.
Just to add a little context there for anybody else, Conlon subscribes to Matt Dinneman's Patreon, so he gets to pre-read the following book. I don't, so I've only listened to his latest release, so that's why he says that I have read.
Yeah.
Um, your number 3, Pet Cemetery, Stephen King. Absolutely amazed that this made your list. I know you are more into the horror stuff than I, but why this book? There are so many out there. I don't even think this is the best Stephen King book.
So I've lost two brothers. And that when you lose a sibling, you lose someone close to you like that, there's a type of pain that people say, I'm sorry, I lost my grandma or whatever, and it's not the same thing. It's just not. Um, Stephen King thought this was his most horrifying book, and I 100% agree. There's not a lot of books, shows, anything like that that aren't just scary, but like actually horrifying. Um, when I think about what good writing is, I think of this book. When I want to be inspired to write better, I think about this book. I enjoy writing. At some point, I think it'd be fun to write a book. I do some of that in my spare time, and this to me is prime writing. They've done two adaptations of Pet Cemetery, and I don't think that this is a book that can be done in a movie and be done successfully. Because what makes this book so special is the moment, spoiler alerts, you've probably all seen the movie at this point, but the his kid dies and he's at the funeral and he's talking through the emotions of these two parents. And the way that he writes those two emotions hit me like a dump truck the first time I read it. It smashed me. I remember I was sitting in Park City and I was reading the pages and I was at just a bagel shop sitting there and I started crying at the bagel shop. It smashed me. Um, and he wrote for someone who didn't lose a child to be able to write that is astounding to me. It
Okay.
is a yeah, yeah.
All right. Why don't you go read through your honorable mentions?
Okay. I actually do want to talk about Kingdoms of Death. It's book 4 in Sun Eater series, and it is all of it is insanely well written. If you like Dune or any of those sci-fi classics, read Sun Eater. It reads like those sci-fi classics, but in my opinion, it is the prime example I can think of somebody taking some classic material and growing on it. It is in my personal opinion better in basically every single way. Give it a shot. Now, my honorable mentions: Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. It's the third book in the Red Rising series. I really like the first 3 books of Red Rising. The series that he's writing right now, the first 2 books were really good, and the third book I think is not great. You Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. He is the only person that is a Green Beret, Navy SEAL, and the other one, Ranger, alive right now, and his story is crazy. It's worth reading. Completionist Chronicles Book 5, Ruthless by Dakota Kraut. It is another lit RPG, and it's another one that requires the main character to think in order to get through all of these challenges that he's going through. It's not as good as Dungeon Crawler, but as far as books that I purely just enjoy, it might be my most enjoyable book series. It's one that I'll play in the background while I work around the yard or different things like that, and I have a good time with it every time. Promise of Blood, Book 1, Powder Mage. This is one that has a really cool magic system. They actually sniff gun smoke in order to perform their magic, and it's done during Napoleonic Wars time frame. It's a very unique book that I haven't read anything else quite like it. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome, and this is basically his own personal journal. So you are literally reading the words of the most powerful man in the world. At that time, it was undisputed he was the most powerful man in the world, and you get to hear his actual thoughts. It's got a lot of value in that for me. How does he think? How does he go about his day? How does he construct his day? You get to be a part of that process. It's very cool. The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I love the way that depression is addressed in this book and book series. I like Brandon Sanderson. I enjoy a lot of his books, but I think there's a lot of negatives to Brandon Sanderson too that people in Utah in particular don't address nearly enough. That
Like
people are
what?
pacing problems, a lot of sometimes whiny characters like Shalon in this series. I don't really like the character because I find her whiny. Um, things like that people kind of just skip past because there is a lot of really good there too. And I'm not going to say that there's not. They're still well worth reading in my opinion, but there are definitely negatives. His prose are pretty simple, which can be a fine thing. And then The Broken Eye, Lightbringer, Book 3 by Brent Weeks. This is a also a very cool magic system. The magic is done by light rays, and different light rays allow them to have different access to different powers. And during different solar cycles, they're able to do different things. It's a cool story with a unique twist. All right, those are my honorable mentions. What about you, Josh?
My honorable mentions are Graceling by Kristen Cashore, Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand, And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, Fairy Tale by Stephen King, and Fablehaven, just the series as a whole. I don't think the first one's the best one, but Fablehaven by Brandon Mull.
Cool, cool, cool. I almost put a Fablehaven on my honorable mentions. I wrote it and then erased it. It was the third or the fourth one. They're really good books.
They're amazing books, but just didn't quite make my list. My number one, Head Game by Tim Downs. It's a not very well known book. Um, the author doesn't even write anymore. This book is out of print. Um, brief synopsis without giving anything away for the listeners. I know I've talked to you about it. Uh, Serial killer doesn't want to do the work himself, so he influences people's lives to the point where they do it themselves. And that's all I want to say about the plot, because for those who haven't listened to it, you just gotta listen to it or read it beginning to end. Knowing things about the book ahead of time kind of takes away from its experience.
I
But
completely
Head
agree.
Game Tim Downs.
I read this one because of you, and it is a very good mystery type novel. And that's usually not my main reading experience, but I really like this one. If you're into that kind of thing, I would recommend it.
I wouldn't describe it as mystery.
You wouldn't?
For me,
Really?
it's psychological thriller. Yeah. The very beginning tells you who the bad guy is.
I
It's
guess that's
not
true.
who
That's a good
done
point.
it
That's a
or
good point. It's more of
mystery
a
or
thriller.
whateve. It's oh my gosh, I don't know what the freak is gonna go on, and oh my gosh, I don't know what I would do in this scenario. Holy crap!
That's fair.
It's not a very long book. The reason it is at my number one is this is the book that got me into actually reading. Pure and simple. I of course had read books through middle school and high school. Hardly any of my required readings, but I read like Shakespeare in my Shakespeare class, and I read The Old Man and the Sea in my English class. What a waste of time that was.
I
Uh,
almost put that in my honorable mentions just because I know you hate it.
it's the worst book of all time. To anybody who's considering reading that book, save yourself some trouble and don't. Um, Last week we talked about um, Fight Club
Yeah,
in our movies.
I was actually just gonna ask about
And
that.
I have since rewatched it because of how passionate you were.
Okay.
And I have this new input to say.
All right.
And
All right.
that Fight Club and The Old Man and the Sea are what people say is good when they want to sound smart because it's worthless time that you have spent.
That in have you ever read The Tale of Two Cities?
I have not read that one, no.
Okay, it's kind of Charles Dickens in general. That's how I feel about Charles Dickens. I like Ernest Hemingway, The Man in the Sea. I There were parts of it that I enjoyed. I didn't hate it.
There's only one part. It's about one old guy's singular fishing trip.
There are
It
actually
is horrible.
that's
There's
true. That's true.
no iceberg theory. There's nothing to it. It
There
is
are parts of
terrible.
the writing that I find beautiful in the prose and how he actually writes it. But you are correct about the story of the book. Tale of Two Cities is just a drawn out mess, in my opinion. It's so long for no reason. Um, and I can get where you're coming from with The Man in the Sea. I can understand that point of view. You are still absolutely wrong about Fight Club.
No, I'm not. It's true. It is something people talk about to sound smart. It is not actually deep. There's no iceberg theory. There's no greater meaning. It is terrible. The Old Man in the Sea is worse because it is reading, not because like I can get through Fight Club in an hour and a half. I gotta take days to get through The Old Man in the Sea because I'm such a slow reader, and it is so horrible.
That's
I
funny.
truly, truly believe this from the bottom of my heart. It's about people sounding smart, not actually of substance. It is
There
such garbage.
there's definitely art forms that are like that for sure. For sure. There are art snobs. There are people that watch movies like I think The Lighthouse, if you've ever seen The Lighthouse, is it's a lot that way. It's definitely a movie that's that way. But I don't think that with Fight Club.
It's 100% that way with Fight Club. I'll die on that hill. When I get into heaven, that's going to be at the top of the list of questions to ask is was there any substance to Fight Club? And when I find out that I'm right, I'm going to change the skies to say I told you so. That's what's going to happen because
And God's going to be like, there were
nothing.
a few true pieces of art that your world produced, and one of those was Fight Club.
You really think that? You really think God
No,
is going to say Fight Club is a true piece of art?
I'm giving you crap. I don't think he'll say that there wasn't any substance to it. That's ridiculous. But he won't say it's one of the great pieces of art. You're not. This isn't a David or Sistine Chapel.
It's nothing. It is a waste of an hour and a half. That's what it is.
Nah. Okay.
But anyway, Head
My
Game. Yeah, great book. Out of print, you got to kind of look for it, but it's fantastic. Mystery people would enjoy it. Thriller people would enjoy it. It's really quick. Like I said, I am a slow reader. I got through it in a day
to
because it
be
was so
honest,
good.
it was one of those books where Josh bugged me about it for weeks, and I didn't even touch it. And then when I did touch it, I read it in a day. It was good.
Yeah. All right.
My
What's your number one?
number one is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He was a psychologist that ended up in one of the concentration camps. He was a Jew, and he gets separated from his wife, and he goes through the story of how did he survive the concentration camp, and then because he was a psychologist, he notices why some people survive and why some people don't. He talks about his experience in this horrible situation. He talks about the experiences of others and what what he would notice when people were going to die, when they had given up, and how he kept going. The Man's Search for Meaning is kind of a giveaway. It's how meaning affects our lives and how meaning helps us survive horrible situations, and how you can incorporate meaning to help you fight through things like depression, anxiety, problems that we all go through. How you can incorporate meaning and have it push you to do greater things, whether that's starting your own business or trying to work for that promotion or trying to be a better father for your kids. It's to me, there were right at that period in time, Freud was the big psychologist, and he was the profounding thought leader. You have some of these other people, Nietzsche pops up during that time, and Viktor Frankl is another one of these different ways of thinking. And he counteracts a lot of what Freud was bringing up with kind of a negative view on humanity and why we are the way that we are. And he goes in more of a positive sense and a more positive, meaningful. That is why we are here, is to provide meaning, to find meaning, to search for something more. And I love this idea and I love this contrast with Freudian psychology during the time period. I love the idea of the people that survive a horrible situation versus that don't. If you can tell that from my favorite books. And in my opinion, this is the best example of bringing that concept to people in a simple way that is easy to digest, even though it was such a horrible experience. He wasn't even going to produce this book. He wasn't going to show it to anybody. He waited years before he published this book, and he published it under a pseudonym originally because he didn't want people to know it was him. But in order for his methods to be able to be taken up by more people, he put his name behind it, and he said, "This is me. I survived. I made it." And in times where my life has been low, or where I felt invisible, or I felt depressed, or I felt like my brother died, what am I still doing here, kind of a thing, I turn to this book, and it changes the attitude of my life. It changes the trajectory of my life. It changes the way that I view the world and I view other people.
All right, fair enough. And with that, we're going to go ahead and come to a close. Thank you, anybody who listened. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the like button multiple times because it's great. Reach out, let us know, ask any questions you might have. We've got one more of the getting to know us before we get to the real what we have planned for this podcast, and it's we're just going to talk about TV shows, and we'll see you then.